What's up, guys? In this video, I'm gonna give you 3 tips to have better, heavier, crispier metal tone today. Come on! Let's talk about tone. Let's talk about tone. What do you need to get great tone? What do you need to have heavy, tight, articulate attack and beef and spice and heaviness? Well, as it turns out, really not that much. You do have to have a little bit of an understanding of what sort of gear does what. Some amps just don't get that kind of a sound. Some guitars don't have that kind of attack. Some pickups, there's a lot of variables that go into making really awesome tone happen, all right? It's not a magical thing. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in your sleep. Maybe it does, I don't know. But the thing that you gotta keep in mind is there's a lot of ways to achieve this. There's a lot of different techniques and tools that you can use, but I'm gonna show you a very basic version of that. Now, I don't expect everybody to have the same gear as I do or anything like that. Obviously, there's a lot of variables out there, a lot of variations of amps, a lot of different types and tones and sounds and all this kind of stuff. But this is what I have, and this is how I can try to show you the best way to dial in your amp and also to get that nice clean attack that you're used to hearing when you hear heavy metal guitar players in modern music. So let's get into it. The first thing that you're gonna wanna do is when you set up your amp where all the knobs, to begin with the exception of the volume, the master volume, all the knobs, set them straight up to noon, 12 o'clock. There's something that is very commonly unknown about amps, and it's actually that the straight up setting is the most neutral setting of the amp, okay? So not 0 and not 10 or 11 if you are in spinal tap. When you have them all set up at noon, what's gonna happen is that gives the amp the same amount of room up and down to be adjusted. So if it needs more treble, you can give it more treble. If it needs less treble, you can give it less treble. But this is basically the middle of the road when it comes to amps. So you should definitely try at first gain, bass, mid, treble, all these things straight up. Now your volume, of course, keep that at whatever level it needs to be in order to not blow your neighbors away or piss your parents off. So try that first. Keep that low, everything else at noon, and then you can bump everything up. As it turns out, with my particular amp, I have the EVH 5153. It's a brand that I've been playing for 10 years. I am an endorsed artist, and I love these amps. I tour with them, and I do a lot with them. And what I've actually found, now, of course, I started with all of my knobs at noon, but what I actually found for my particular tone that I love, I basically set everything at about 6.5 to 7 right across. Now, all that's doing is taking the entire EQ and bumping up. I understand that, but for some reason, it just gels in that particular spot for me. The attack seems nice. It seems like when I'm playing chords, I've got clarity, and that's just where I happen to like it. Maybe if you have the same style amp, you can try it out. The next thing, that if your amp is still not giving you the right amount of oomph and bite, what you might want to consider investing in is a tube screamer or an overdrive. Now, there's the very famous Ibanez tube screamers. There's also like the tube screamers that I have, which is the Maxon OD808. This is actually one of the original tube screamer circuits that everything else was sort of based off of. So each tube screamer has a little bit of a different tone to it, a little bit of a different sizzle. This is not to be mistaken for a distortion pedal. If you're playing clean into an amp with no other sort of gain happening and you stomp on this tube screamer, it will give it a bit of a bluesy sort of sizzle. But it will by no means make it like heavy metal distortion. It's not even about that. The way that you'll dial this in is you're actually gonna use it with the drive basically completely off to taste, but you will never have the drive full up. You'll basically use it where the volume is as loud as it will go for the most part, depending on if the pedal is noisy or not. Some pedals make a little bit more noise than others. But dial that in, but that's gonna be fairly high. Let's say at least 3/4 of the way up, and your drive is completely down, and the tone will be somewhere in the middle. Set it at noon, just like the amp, and treat it to taste, whether it needs a little bit more high end or a little less high end. That's basically what you're gonna get out of that. And what this does with this overdrive pedal is it takes your clean signal from your guitar and it just grits it up a little bit, gives it a little bit more gain to begin with. And then it goes into your amp's gain stage, creating a very, very tight, very clean sounding, heavy tone. But like I said, this is not a distortion pedal. You don't really want to use a distortion pedal in front of your amp if you're running the amp on a high gain channel. All that's really going to do is create lots and lots of noise. Your amp is already creating enough distortion. If you're using something similar to this that has 12 AX7s in the preamp, that's allowing it to get very crunchy and heavy. So there's not really much need for a distortion pedal. For instance, and I'll do another video on this, I have one of these EVH 5150 overdrive pedals. But this isn't really an overdrive pedal. This is a full-blown distortion pedal. It sounds very similar to what the blue channel on the amp should sound like, all by itself in its own pedal. I'm gonna do a whole other video on this one. This one's an interesting thing. The last thing to consider to get nice, tight, crispy attack in your tone is use a thick pick. I'm using right now about a 1.26 millimeter pick, which is smaller than what I've used for most of my life. If anybody else knows me, most of the time I've played a 1.52 thickness pick. Now what this does is it doesn't allow the pick to bend so much when you're playing through. I actually started to get used to playing a slightly lighter pick because it will give you a little bit of twang. When you use a light pick, they do tend to twang a little bit, but not if they're too light. If they're too light, they don't really do much of anything, and they're only good for, say, for instance, acoustic guitar and playing clean and strummy stuff. This is where these real thin picks are really nice. But for metal, thick picks, man. Use something that is gonna really stay stiff in your fingers so that when you're picking, it's very articulate and it stays true to what you're trying to play. Giant picks. Where'd that go? All right, that's my tutorial on tone. I hope it was helpful to you. If it was, do me a favor, give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't already, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace! In today's video, I'm gonna give you 3 tips to help you dial in the heaviest metal tone right now. Okay, take 2.